So today, I think I'm going to talk about SSH. And as usual, let's just start with the man page and see what man has to say about SSH. In the description, it says that SSH is a program for logging into a remote machine and for executing commands on a remote machine. So what that means is it provides us a secure shell that we can use to connect to another server or computer, and we can do whatever the heck we want when we're on there. So let's take a look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH into my router. I'm going to SSH as the root user. My router is located at 192.168.1.1. And as soon as I get in, assuming I can get in, you'll see I get this friendly message. If you look at the prompt now, it actually says root at ddwrt. You can see my prompts changed because that's the host name of the server that I'm currently connected to. I'm running a ddwrt router. And now that I'm on the box, I have access to everything. I can see the full file system. I go into the, let's see, var log. And go look at some, whoops, var log. Whoops, cd var log. I can cat some of the log files there. And now if I exit, let's just clear that. So there's no clear on the ash cell, so I'll exit and I'm back. You can see that the connection is now closed. I was connected to 192.168.1.1, and now I'm back on my local machine. My host name is Biggie. So by just typing in the command ssh root at 192.168.1.1, what that did was it attempted to connect to the server 192.168.1.1 as the root user. I had no problems logging in because my router already knows who I am. But usually you'll be prompted by either a password or a key exchange. If we try this again, let's just take a look. I'm going to run the same command, but this time with the -v. The -v is just going to make it a little bit more verbose. You can see what's happening. We'll be able to look at the full key exchange. If we go back up here, let's just take a look. You'll see, very beginning, attempting to connect to a Debian host. Okay, we're looking in my SSH config. There's no entry that matches. We'll talk about that in a minute. Next up, we're connecting on the default port 22. So by default, if you don't specify it, SSH is a protocol that runs on port 22. So that's the port that it attempts to establish a TCP connection to. It's then, if we just scroll down a little bit here, where am I looking? We should be able to see a key exchange in just a minute. First, to check my known host file. So this is a file that SSH keeps track of and adds entries for each host that we connect to. It keeps track of, I think, the MAC address as well as the IP address. So as we try to reconnect to the same host, if we get back a different MAC address or IP, there's potential that we're facing a man-in-the-middle attack. So by keeping track of our known host, we know that we're still connecting to the same server and we're not giving away sensitive information during the key exchange. Keep going down. You can see the build of my DDWRT router here. And now look right here. You'll see we're offering a public key from my home directory, my account mo, from this hidden folder, this private folder called .ssh, and a file called IDRSA. What we're actually doing is we're trying to authenticate using my public key. If the server on the other side knows who I am, they'll be able to find my public key in the authorized keys file. And if it finds a record for me, then it's like, yeah, you're good. I know who you are. This is your private key. It lines up with the public key that you're issuing. You're good. I'll let you in. And then authenticates me on port 122, and I'm in the box. So let's just take a look. If I look, I should have a .ssh folder. I do. Let's just cd into that .ssh folder. Let's go back to the top here. Oh, I can't clear. Again, this is the ash cell. And let's just take a look at what's in my authorized keys file. So again, I am now SSH'd into my router as the root account. I just changed directory into the .ssh folder, and I'm just taking a peek at what's in the authorized keys file, and you'll see that is the public key for my account. That's the public key that I use to authenticate against that server. If I didn't have that entry in there, it wouldn't have let me in. It would have been like, hey, it may drop back to password authentication depending on how your SSH server is configured. I tend to disable it, so I just use public key. I just use the key exchange for authentication. So if I were to remove that entry right now and then I exited and then try to reconnect, my router would say, no go, sorry, goodbye. So let's just exit. Now, that's all well and good. Oh, before we do that, let's just go to my .ssh folder. and just make sure that I'm telling the truth here. Okay, let's just do a listing of what I got here. So you'll see I've got authorized keys file, right? So these are keys, basically these are public keys that I'm saying if you have a public key in this file, then you can SSH into this machine. I've got my own public key and my private key. So I shared my public key with that server, but I would never give away my private key. If I give away my private key, then pretty much anyone could impersonate me and get access to anything that I have access to. So if I just take a look at what's in my public key, let's make sure I get this right, public, you'll see that the two keys actually are the same. See, I think it starts with 4 A's. We've got 4 A's down here. My email at molcon.ca, email at molcon.ca. Yeah, it's the same key. So this is the key pair that I'm using to authenticate to connect to that host. That's pretty cool. The other thing we'll find in here is there's also a config file, right? Actually, there's a config file, and I kind of talked about the known hosts. If I were to actually just, let's just do a head on known host. Let's just, oops, yeah, that's right. That should work. And one. We'll just take the first line in there. You'll see this is a host that I've connected to in the past. I'm not sure what the encoding is. Maybe it's basically for encoding, but it's keeping track of all the different hosts that I've connected to and making sure that I'm not getting spoofed when I try to reconnect. Okay, so now that's the known host file. I talked about my public key, the private key, and my authorized keys file, which is basically a listing of public keys that I'm going to accept if people try to connect to me. And that basically means you can SSH into this account. And then I've also got this config file. Now this config file is actually quite handy. Sometimes when you're SSHing to a host, like in this case, I'm SSHing directly to an IP address. It's actually quite hard to remember what account and what IP to connect to every single. If you've got multiple servers that you have to connect to, this can be quite cumbersome. And this is where the SSH config file comes in. We can actually put in some settings. So let's just take a look at this. We'll go to config. We can add an alias for a host that we want to connect to. In this case, I want to connect to my DDWRT router. So I'm just going to call it, let's just call it router, actually. Let's just call it router. SSH to my router. I'm going to connect to this host. The host name is 192.168.1.1. What's the account I'm going to log in as, which is root. And the default port in this case is 22. So I don't actually have to specify the port number, so I can just omit that. Now, so I've got this basically one entry to connect to this specific host, and this naming right here, this router, this becomes like an alias. So I don't actually have to remember the host name or IP address. I can just use this alias. So whenever I want to connect to this router, I can just connect using this alias. So to do that, it looks something like this. If I go SSH router, SSH going to look into my config file, and it should be able to find an entry. And you see now I'm just connected to my router again using the alias. This can come in quite handy. Here's where else it can come in. So most of you probably don't realize, if you don't use SSH explicitly, you actually are most of the time when you're connecting to GitHub. If I were to go SSH to git at github.com, let's just take a look at what happens here. The very bottom, if everything went well, you'll see, hi Mocod, you've successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide shell access. So it's by connecting to GitHub at the Git account, I've actually authenticated, but it's not giving me shell access. I've got my public-private key exchange occurs, and it's like, yeah, I know who you are. And so whenever you ever do like a git clone using the Git protocol or the SSH protocol, you're actually just using SSH. So what I could actually do, if I don't want to actually connect, if I wanted to update my config file, I could actually add a new alias for GitHub. And let's say instead of going to github.com, I just want to connect to GH, right? The host name is github.com. The user is git. And that's pretty much it. It's a default port 22. Let's take a look. I'm going to go to my development directory. Let's go to development, GitHub, Molcon. Let's go clone a project. Git clone, git at github.com. Let's pick on something I don't have. What don't I have? Let's go git clone, git at, actually let's delete that C book. I don't think I have anything going on in there. FRC book. Okay, so let's go. Let's start over. We'll go git clone. Let's clone git at gh.com, /, and this is basically my username and the project I want to clone. So I'm going to clone the cbook.git. Oops, oops, not .com, it's just GH. That's my alias I put into my SSH config. And you'll see it actually just cloned the project. If I go into the zbook directory and I cat the config file, you'll see that it's actually connecting to, whoops, take a look here, whoops. It's just, do I not have tmux going there? Yeah, well, it's trying to connect to git@gh:/molconzbook.com. So GH hasn't actually resolved anything. If I were to do an ns lookup for GH, be like, what the heck? I don't know what that is. But SSH can. SSH knows what GH is, right? There we go. I just authenticated with GitHub again. So I've just created my own alias. That, in a nutshell, from a very high level, becomes a very powerful tool. So if you want to administer multiple servers, SSH is your friend. That's all I got. See ya.